All right, I'll get started. So I'm not sure exactly what the material on the website said about what I'm going to say. I think it said something about quality assurance and ensuring quality in emergency departments. Quality assurance is, well, it's more of a myth than really a principle. It should be quality improvement because it's a lifelong endeavor. Quality assurance. It's something that you're always striving for. So I choose to lecture more on quality, quote, assurance in the emergency department and really trying to understand and build a culture of continuous improvement. And I, like Josh, have no disclosures, but if you have some that you can throw my way, I'm very, very happy to consider them. And as far as my affiliations, I was at Boston Medical Center for a long time, then most recently at Beth Israel, and I've been transitioning into UVM, where I'm currently on staff and have a faculty appointment. So let's drop in. So the objectives that we're going to go over is we are going to identify some QA measures. This is not a deep dive into measure sets, and we're not going to talk a lot about, or really much at all about, pay for performance. We'll touch a little bit on it. We're going to do a little bit of design and management of process. We'll talk a bit about approaches to gaps in performance, and I'll use a case to go through to identify a gap in performance. And I'd really like to revisit what was discussed in the last lecture about the importance of culture in continuous improvement. And again, this is an overview lecture. We're supposed to keep this to 30 minutes, and each of these topics you can talk endlessly about. So those of you who know me know I can't go through a lecture without mentioning at least this guy's name once. And this article is from 1999, so that seems like a long time ago, but he was involved in quality improvement back way, way long time ago in the 40s and 50s. And much of the credit for Japan's post-war reconstruction was attributed to two individuals. One of them was MacArthur for reasons not necessarily related to quality, but it was Deming. And the slides are uploaded both to the SAM site and to the Google Drive that Josh has, so these hyperlinks should work. Well, has anyone ever heard this quote before? You guys have, I'm sure, heard this quote. So I don't know exactly where it first came from, but Don Berwick says it a lot, and it's an IHI, every IHI lecture has this. So every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. And this particular patient walked into triage and said to the triage nurse, "I ate a bad onion." I don't think that's in the EPIC structured text quotes now, but this was a long time ago at one of the many hospitals that I worked, and this was written in the triage notes. We'll get back to that case in a little bit. What do you guys see here? So I like this slide. My son drew this for me. I explained to him what I was trying to do. And the driver is doing a few things, right? Of course, they have their hands on the wheel. They're trying to drive straight on this road. So they're looking at what's ahead of them, and they're also looking at what's going on in the rearview mirror. So in continuous improvement, you're constantly analyzing data, using it, and then trying to improve better, right? Always trying to do better. And people try to say, okay, quality improvement, quality assurance, what's the difference? And there is a lot of overlap, but just to try to dichotomize things, QA, and this is right out of this textbook, which is in the small print at the bottom, it's AHRQ. But QA tends to be more individual focused, whereas QI tends to be more system focused. QA, perfection is myth, really. And QI is fallibility is really recognized. And QA tends to focus on the individual. Josh this is what you did, it was good, it was bad, whereas in QI, the focus is really more in teamwork. Peer review is often ignored or less emphasized in QA, and it's really valued in QI, and errors can be actually punished more in the QA model, whereas errors are really looked at as opportunities in QI. Moving on to the science of improvement, which is an actual framework that the IHI endorses. I spent 10 months in a course with the IHI trying to learn a little bit about, and I say a little bit about, the science of improvement. I think it's a lifelong endeavor to really become facile at it. And Deming is really a pivotal influence in the science of improvement, in that framework, developing that framework. Now, we could spend a year learning about it. I couldn't teach you myself. I could probably get you started. But I do want to go through some of the model of improvement. Now, let's shift back to QA. And what is QA? What are some of the activities that you or your organization engages in that are examples of, or more examples of, things that fall into the QA bucket? So credentialing itself, which is based in large part off of CMS mandates and sort of run by or executed by the Joint Commission, and each of you are on medical staff, and that has a framework. That includes stuff that OPPE, FPPE, ongoing versus focused professional practice evaluation. A lot of risk management activities are QA focused. A lot of infection control. What's your CLABSI rate? That's QA. Patient experience, utilization review, accreditation of the organization. A lot of that involves things that fall more in the QA bucket. And then what is, QA as quality? We have to have measures. We have to have a benchmark. What is a measure? And the CMS says, and this is out of their standards, it's standards for measuring the performance of healthcare providers, so those are individuals, to care for patients and populations. Now back to our case. So 45 minutes after this patient arrives, they're triaged to a hallway. Busy place, a lot of patients in the waiting room. They ate a bad onion, and it was last Wednesday, and it's like Friday now, right? I don't know. What ESI score would you assign someone who ate a bad onion? 10 minutes later, resident sees the patient. That's pretty good, right? It's busy, they're put in a hallway. Resident sees the patient. I think it's an internal medicine rotator, so they took a really good history, did a physical exam, took a while. Ordered some labs and an EKG. Sounds appropriate, right? So let's get back to these measures. Who makes these measures? Where do they come from? They make them. Somebody makes them, right? So who makes them? How do they get into some little book or list that somebody says, Kia, you didn't do well on this measure? And where did this measure come from? So the National Quality Forum is an organization that helps to develop measures. They solicit input. You yourself can make suggestions to participate. And ACEP has a really good section, a clinical emergency data registry, that there's a link there that I encourage you guys to look at. And it's our attempt as a specialty to contribute to measure development and help to determine our own destiny. Then there's other measures, other benchmarks. And there's not 100% consensus on what we should be measuring and how important it should be. The ED Benchmarking Alliance is a group that includes over 1,700 member hospitals, and they have lots of activities. They have more than 25 data elements. Members can access a website and sort of compare themselves to other like hospitals, and you could even, within your own profile, change what you compare yourself on. Let's say you have, a division that's you have your own pediatric ER, and you want to see what the other peds hospitals do versus level 1 trauma centers. You can change your profile. So let's look at some of the CMS measures. So we have numbers. We put numbers on everything. It makes it hard to understand, right? So ED arrival to departure for discharged patients, or length of stay for discharged patients. Left without being seen rate, right? So that's a really important measure. People pay attention to it. And there's a lot of good evidence that left without being seen patients can be sick people. They're not just a runny nose or a sprained ankle that walk off. Well, maybe the sprained ankle hobbles off, but there are MIs that leave because they don't want to wait that long. But a lot of the work that goes into reducing left without being seen, in some places, maybe not yours, involves fixing the number, but not necessarily fixing the drivers that created this bad number. And then there's length of stay for admitted patients and length of stay for discharged, for the decision to departure time. So decision to departure for admitted patients, what does that equal? Boarding, right, boarding. So that's a really good one, right? But, well, unfortunately the CMS retired those measures. And there's probably a whole backstory to it, I know some of it. And I do encourage you to read Scott and Arjun's editorial about this, which is a really good piece. You can access that in the handout too. So then the CMS set also has other measures that are not specific to the ED, but they are related to us, right? I mean, people have heart problems and they come to us, they have strokes, there's some imaging stuff, sepsis, everybody's favorite measure set. And let's talk about the cardiac care. Now you guys know what's wrong with this person, right? 60 minutes after they arrive, the EKG is done. 65 minutes after they arrive, the resident presents the case to the attending, who's pretty quick. They go in to see the patient right away, and 80 minutes later, attending walks out, walks over to the rack, and picks up the STEMI on the EKG. You think they made that door-to-balloon time in 90 minutes? Probably not. What are these? Oh, come on. Everybody wants 4 stars, right? I mean, unless there's 5 stars, then you want 5. But everybody wants 4 stars. So the CMS has a stars rating system, right? Is anybody familiar with the stars rating system? I'm sure you are familiar with it. Does anybody understand the stars rating system? I don't know. I do my best. But you should know just that my takeaway is everybody that's affiliated with your organization wants you to contribute to being a 4-star organization. That door to EKG at 80 minutes is not going to get you 4 stars. And being a 2-star organization is not a fun place to be. Which is why, unfortunately, a lot of effort is put at fixing the number of each measure rather than addressing the drivers that create the performance. If you haven't done this ever, go to this website and start comparing your hospital or hospitals that you know, and be very careful. Forewarned, it's very addicting. So what is the stars rating system? There is a system. It involves several domains. The domains on the left, each domain is worth 22% of the total score. And on the right is a single domain that comprises 12% of the score. And that includes a lot of stuff that is important to us, right? Timeliness of care, effectiveness of care, efficient use of imaging. So notice the weighting here. So 88% of the score is all the stuff on the left, and a lot of the stuff on the right is stuff that we find very important to us. So it's something to think about. And within that, left without being seen rate is one of the most important, at least as it relates to the ED and the score contributor. So what are some of the ingredients of improvement, of continuous improvement? Well, you need a framework, And the last lecture talked about several frameworks and tools and principles. And the last lecture talked about principles too. And I think those are sort of the ingredients to moving forward. As I mentioned, the model for improvement, which is what the IHI endorses, is something that is a sort of a ingrained framework in our culture as well as in the UK and Australia and Canada. And this circle of Deming, as Jen referred to, involves planning, doing, studying, acting. Planning, doing, studying, acting. You just keep doing it, and it's got to be continuous. And some of the questions you ask yourselves, or that the team should ask, this is called the aim, is what are you trying to accomplish? What's your aim? What exactly do you want to do in what population in what time period? How are you going to know that a change is an improvement? Things can change, but did it actually get better? Maybe you might change one thing and hurt something else. And what changes can you make that will result in an improvement? What are your change ideas? And so Deming developed this system of profound knowledge, and it involves 3 different domains. One is an appreciation for the system, there's understanding variation, building knowledge, and the human side of change, which some call psychology of change. And I don't know which one of these is most important. I think they're all important. So how do you do it? Well, you have to make a team. You have to set the aims, as I mentioned, establish measures, select your changes, test those changes. And testing is very important. A lot of people start with a change idea. And in the back of their mind, there's a problem. They're like, this sucks, I gotta fix it. You know, the burning problem. There's something burning and I gotta fix it. Here's the solution. And they start with the change idea. But you have to test that change first, because just because I think that this is the solution doesn't mean it's going to work. And I got to test it. And that's where the plan, do, study, act cycle. The more confident you are that your change idea is effective, the less testing needs to be done. But be wary of implementing something before it's tested. I'm sure you guys have all experienced that. And then after you've implemented the changes and you found some success, then you can start on trying to spread it a little further. Not everything that's successful in one section of where you're implementing it will be successful every place. I don't mean necessarily section like a section in the department, but you could have implemented on a shift, you could have implemented it on in a particular site, but spreading the change and sustaining change is very hard. So we identified a gap with that case that I mentioned, and we put together a team. It was involved as many people as we could gather, and as many different types of people, because we're all experts. We think we know it all about our own departments, but we really don't. You really need a true appreciation of your system. And each of us have blinders. We each operate in our own tunnels, and it's hard to have a full appreciation of your own system. So, who here is from San Francisco or has visited San Francisco? Cable car, right? So this guy is looking down, he's trying to get an appreciation of this system. How does this thing work? I listened to the lecture, I read a little bit, but you know, you cannot get, it is impossible for this person from this perspective to have a full appreciation of the system. There are these 8 large wheels, sheaves under the street that change direction, and there's hundreds of smaller sheaves, and that's the system, right? So from your system, you get an EKG put in a slot, and then you pick it out, and what went into that? So you really have to focus on all the frontline workers, gather their input, and process map it. Do not attempt to read the small print. But the point is that the patient shows up there, and the EKG is done way down there, and there's lots of steps in between. And you may not know all of those steps or what goes into all of those steps. So our goal was 10-minute EKG. We process mapped an ideal state. And way on the left side, there's these two purple sort of boxes there. And the point is that the EKG is done close to the front end there. So that's what we tried to do, is to move it. So now we implemented an ideal state with a process, and how do we measure variation? Have you guys seen a stoplight report in your institutions? I mean, unless you don't read your emails or look at the website, I'm sure you've seen a lot of these. These are really good for 30,000-foot view, but they're not particularly good for understanding variation for the purposes of assessing whether a change has made an improvement or not, or assessing your performance. You really need to graph performance over time. And for that, you need something like run charts or control charts, which are very similar, some subtle differences. So they both look at data over time. The run chart's a little bit more simple, control chart's more sensitive. One uses median, one uses mean. The run charts, you can get away with fewer data points. You really need more data points, and there's some math that'll tell you how many data points you need depending on which control charts. There's lots of different ones. You need more data for control charts. And there are rules. And run charts have fewer rules than control charts. I wrote 5 rules per the IHI. That depends on who you're reading and what industry you're in, depending on which will affect what rules you use for your control charts. But they're rather similar in 5 rules for control charts. You won't have to memorize them here. So here's an example of a control chart. This one, I think everybody in the room would say, like, okay, I see a change. We had a lot of variation, and now we're at 100%. So 100% is pretty good. So I guess that's effective. But what about this graph? This is a little bit more messy. And this is at one of the many hospitals that I worked at in the last decade or so. And this is door to EKG times. And this is an X bar and R chart. And there's different kinds of control charts, as I mentioned. There's count data and attribute data, and this is count data. And it's actually phased. See that red line? There's 3 red lines, and the red line that's all the way to the left was a pre-intervention, and the red line in the middle is after improvement, and we dropped the door to EKG time from 40-something minutes to about 20 minutes. And then to the right, it was phased after COVID, and door to EKG times crept up a little bit. But what about in the middle? Does this thing have a pointer? Whoa, I just shut it off. See, there's a cluster of dots there that are above the squiggly blue lines, sort of in November of 2019. So that's different. And I put this slide in there to really show how effective control charts are for finding variation. Now, one rule, remember I said 5 rules in control charts? One rule of looking at variation in control charts that shows special cause variation is if a point is outside of the control limits. And all of those points are outside of the control limits, right? So what happened there? And is that real? There's a bunch of dots all over the place there that are within those blue lines. There's other rules that could potentially make some of those dots special cause variation. But what's special cause variation versus common cause variation? And I still see paper and pen on the table. Not everybody has one. But here's an example that at the IHI and every course that teaches this asks you to do, is take your dominant hand and write 3, go ahead and do it if you want, 5 A's in a row, all next to each other with your dominant hand. And then underneath that, take your non-dominant hand and write 3 A's in a row. And then take a look at them and compare them. And your A's in each of those lines will look rather similar to each other, but the 5 A's in the dominant hand line will definitely look different than, unless you're really truly ambidextrous, will definitely look different than the A's written by your non-dominant hand. And that's the difference between special cause and common cause variation. Your dominant hand will not draw exactly the same A. It won't take you the same time to get to work on your commute each day exactly, but it'll be kind of close within a range, and that's your common cause variation. And your special cause variation will be a snowstorm, a car accident, flat tire, or changing hands when writing your letter A's. So what happened here? What's the special cause variation? So this identified a change, and now your job as a quality improvement specialist is to figure out what that problem is, or what that success is. And then you need to roll up your sleeves and think about it and put together your team. So this is a great case, because what happened here is in November is when daylight savings time switches around, and that's a 60-minute difference there, and one of the EKG machines never got reset. So what about this variation stuff? Why is it important? Because variation can be a thief of your quality. And Don Berwick wrote this in a paper back in 1991. He's one of the founders of the IHI. Variation is a thief. It robs from processes, products, and services the qualities that they are intended to have. And Deming back in the 50s really worked on minimizing, he really promoted minimizing all variation that you can control. And that's what we try to do. Now we're going to talk about the human side of change and the psychology of change. Because you can come up with the greatest plan, this is going to work. This is the secret sauce that's going to fix and plug in whatever you're trying to fix. But unless you get buy-in, it's not going anyplace. I am not a basketball fan, but for some reason, I went to 2 lectures today where other people were basketball fans, and they all used basketball as their, in their talks. And I don't know why basketball is so prominent in SAM this year. But does anyone know who this is? Probably not, because he wasn't a particularly famous basketball player. But this was Rick Barry, and his claim to fame was free throw shooting. Now, I'm not a basketball fan, like I said, but I grew up a long time ago when Wilt Chamberlain was playing, and I knew Wilt Chamberlain was an awesome basketball player. But he was a terrible free throw shooter. And his percentage was less than 50% in 6 different seasons. Rick Barry taught him how to shoot underhand, and he improved his score to 61%. And in one game, he was close to 88% in a single, and he scored over 100 points in that game. But then he switched back to shooting like we see everybody shoot on TV, and that anybody who played basketball was probably taught how to shoot. Who here was taught how to shoot underhand? It is clearly the better way to shoot. I mean, look at those stats. They don't lie, right? So Wilt Chamberlain, one of the best basketball players in history, was shooting under 50% sometimes. And Rick Barry, in his last 3 seasons, shot over 90%. I mean, 95% in the entire season. That's his average. But do you ever see anybody shoot underhand? So in Wilt Chamberlain's autobiography, I don't think he actually wrote it himself, but maybe he did. When asked, he said he felt like a sissy. That's what he said. That's his quote. You read the book. I felt like a sissy. And so he knew it was better, but he couldn't do it. So that's the human side of change. That's what one of the things we need to overcome. So part of overcoming that is really having a great culture of continuous improvement and having everybody be on board, part of the community. And that involves principles, which are shared attitudes, values, goals, practices. And this has been mentioned before in this course, having everybody involved, employees and staff involved in solving problems every day. Now, principles and values sometimes get mixed up. But there's a lot of overlap. Deming had these 14 points. We're not going to go through all of them. And what these 14 points were really their guiding principles. And I want you to look at some of the words there and what they mean. And they'll be in your handouts that you download. But they're action, right? Like drive out fear. Transformation is everybody's job. And there are the Shingo principles. And there are also a lot of action in them. Respect every individual. Lead with humility. Create value for the customer. So how do you do that in your own organization? Those are business. That's a business, manufacturing. What about medicine? So you can do that in your own organization. This is something actionable that you can do. It might not be an organization level set of principles, but you can do that within your own department. University of Vermont has put together a department proposal, still a division of emergency medicine within surgery. And back in the fall, we put together a proposal to the university to become our own department. And the initial proposal had, mission, values, but then in sequential revisions, we decided to put in a set of guiding principles as well, to turn some of those values into actionable things for staff members. So ensure safety, create constancy of purpose. And again, these will be in your notes. So there's 10. Thinks systemically, empower patients and caregivers through education, shared knowledge, and decision making. So these are guiding principles that we would like to have all staff members buy into. And you can't just write these on a piece of paper or in a Word document and then have it be. These need to be cultivated within your organization and within your group. What about barriers? There are a lot of barriers, and they're omnipresent, and they're barriers that are going to require continuous effort to overcome. And one of them big one is hierarchies. Hierarchies are innate in human culture. We have hierarchies. We have ranks, academic ranks, somebody's a chief, somebody's a chair. There's ranks for everything, right? But hierarchies, and even within the resuscitation team, who's the resuscitation leader? You have to have that. It's necessary. There's a tension between having a command structure, an organizational structure that's effective, and not having people feel like they can't participate or be a change maker. So everybody needs to be a change maker. You need to have hierarchies, but you simultaneously have to break down those hierarchies. It's something that I think all of you actually do very well when you're working, right? Even think about that resuscitation. You have a resuscitation where there's a team leader. That team leader might not be the attending, the most senior person in the room. But you still want even the tech to be able to point out, that wire touched, in doing a sterile procedure, that wire touched something non-sterile and stop the procedure. Failure to understand why senior management setting metrics independently without really having a firsthand, without really knowing what's going on at the ground. Tribalism is big. We run into that a lot. Failure to change behavior at all levels. You can't make improvements if behavior is not changed at all levels. And then focusing on blaming people versus fixing processes. And that's unfortunately still a default approach. You really do want to drive out fear in your organization. You may not be able to do it in your entire organization because you don't have responsibility or authority within your entire organization, but you do have responsibility and authority within your own sphere of influence, and that can be very powerful. We want a just culture. We want psychology of safety. And in trying to achieve that, when we look at gaps in performance, we want to figure out, was that an error, a medical error? Or is that at-risk behavior, or was that really reckless behavior? And regardless of where that gets categorized, there is a pitfall to really trying to pin one individual or blame somebody. And I really added this relatively recently, this criminalization piece, because I think that's certainly the top of mind for a lot of people now. And I think that could potentially set us back quite a bit with respect to reporting and errors in medicine. And I recommend you read this IHI joint statement, the Leap Institute joint statement on the topic. Other readings that I recommend is an HBR article that's listed here, as well as the duo's podcast on the IHI, both of which you can access through those links. And John Toussaint says this is near my closing, is what really matters to your patients. And we're going to talk, this is about the tension of measures. What matters to your patients? I know that you have to report a lot of measures to the government, a lot of metrics to the government, but most of those things are useless from the standpoint of the patient. So let's talk about what really matters to your patients. So let's go back to the left without being seen. Does your patient care? Does that patient who came to the waiting room, there's 50 people in the waiting room, does that patient care that doctor or PA or whoever came out and said, oh, hi, I'm Dr. Baker. Oh, you have chest pain. Yeah, we'll get to you real soon. You'll have a seat over there where they're going to draw your blood and do an EKG. And then you spend the next 3 hours in the waiting room. You're no longer left without being seen. We fixed the number. But what do you really care about? Did you really get the care? So that's my point about the tension between measures, trying to fix a measure, and trying to address the issues that are the drivers for that measure. So in summary, embrace a set of principles, work with it, pick a framework to work within. I advocate for the model of improvement. Really respect everybody. Everybody is a change maker every day. Hierarchy is overt and hidden. The hidden ones are the toughest. Can be pitfalls. And you still have to identify and address measures that are important to your organization. And remember, continuous improvement means less projects because you won't have problems to fix. Other resources in the handouts, and thank you.
Sorry, I've been multitasking it. Another thing as well, so. Which one should I? There you go. So I just want to talk to you briefly about, what career paths are available for you if you decide to start embarking on operations as part of your portfolio, and then depending on where are you in your career, what options are available. So if you're finishing residency, then you may want to consider a fellowship. If you're later on in your career and you're pivoting to operations, you probably don't want to take a 70% pay cut or whatever it would involve to do a fellowship after you've been attending for a few years. So you may want to consider certificate programs, for example, or other courses to try to round out like areas that you may not have as much experience. And then there's the question of an advanced degree. Do you need one to do operations? So there's a number of SAM approved fellowships that you can go to the SAM website and look at. The one thing to know about, all these SAM approved fellowships have an advanced degree as a requirement, and they all encourage scholarly activity. I don't know what encourage means, but it is there. So if you're doing a fellowship, then the question about do you need an advanced degree is essentially answered for you, right? You do not have a choice. You're getting an advanced degree. If you're not doing a fellowship, though, right? If you're coming into operations after doing something else for a number of years and kind of pivoting towards operations as a new area of expertise, you may want to consider some certificate programs to kind of round out areas that you may have less knowledge about. And there's tons of them around. Harvard has what's called a Safety, Quality, Informatics, and Leadership course, which is kind of broad. The Intermountain Health has a number of advanced training programs is in Salt Lake City, Utah. And before COVID, a lot of that was in person. So you go to, Utah in the middle of winter for like a couple of weeks, a couple of times a year. And, a lot of people took advantage of that and, turned it into kind of a pseudo vacation as well. But it's a very great program that's centered more around QA than anything else. But if you have an interest in QA, and you don't have any particular previous grounding in it, it may be a useful course to kind of do to kind of round out that area of expertise. ASAP has the ED Directors Academy. I don't know if anybody has gone to it, but it's it's essentially a 5-day course. It's a great kind of survey course, right? You can't really get into anything in depth in 5 days, but they go over, right? If you all of a sudden became the ED director at your ED and this is completely new to you, going to the ASAP ED Directors course will give you like a very broad overview of all the things that you're going to have to worry about going forward. AEEM essentially has a very similar course that they build. It's just, they hold it at a different city. I don't know which city AEM does it. ASAP does it in Dallas, so, So advanced degrees, there's plenty of different letters that you can get. It's just what flavor you want. Depending on what your goals are, you may want to target, what that advanced degree is. Honestly, if you're doing an MPH, I think the MPH is greater value if you're going to have a much heavier research focus, right? The MPH is less valuable in terms of like direct management information. MBAs are useful just because it's like currency that's understood outside of medicine. So if you're thinking about, dealing with the C-suite, or, if you're thinking of expanding outside of the walls of the emergency department, right, the MBAs tend to be, a degree that people understand what it is. The greatest disadvantage of the MBA is probably the most expensive degree out of all of them that you can get, right? So depending if you're doing a fellowship and they offer the MBA as part of the fellowship and you're not paying for it, then it's great. If you're paying for the MBA out of pocket, maybe less great, right? And then there's a number of other degrees that have come into being over the last, number of years. I think the Masters in Healthcare Administration and the Masters in Public Administration are a little more established and people know them fairly well. And the advantage of those is they're more targeted to healthcare, right? The MBA is really more targeted towards business, which means that, the profit motive is really kind of like a big component, and there are some differences between the nonprofit sector and the for-profit sector, and some of those things don't really port over that easily. So the MHA might be a good degree to consider. And then there's a number of newer kind of degrees that you may want to explore. Harvard has a couple of fairly new degrees, one in healthcare management, one quality and safety operation, and clinical operations, which are like much more targeted to like a particular area of focus, which are good if you know exactly what you want out of life, but it may give you less flexibility if you decide to kind of change your focus later on. So do you need an advanced degree for a career in administration operations? Right, it depends who you ask. If you ask somebody that has an advanced degree, they're going to tell you, yes, of course, it's absolutely necessary to get an advanced degree if you want to do, operations and administration. If you ask somebody that doesn't have it, they'll probably tell you it's absolutely not necessary. What I would say is, if you're doing a fellowship, you no longer have a choice, right? The fellowship now requires an advanced degree as part of the deal. If you're coming to things later in your career, then you just have to weigh the expense and the time that you have to spend to get that advanced degree versus the actual advantage in terms of what you're doing or where you want to head. I have an MPH, but I got the MPH when I was in medical school, so it was just, I had it because I had it ahead of time, not because I had any great master plan as to what I was going to do with it. I essentially got the MPH during med school because I only had to pay for a third of the credits. So it seemed like a very good deal to do, but not because I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. So in terms of career path, so you have to start thinking, what's your ultimate goal? And the one good thing about administration operations is that it is a career that lends itself not only to emergency medicine, but lends itself to having the ability to have a job outside of EM as well, right? And the hospital path, lends itself to a lot of different possibilities. With that, you also have to weigh, what your other career goals are and what your other life goals are. And what I advise everybody is, you have to have contingency plans, right? Just because you think you're going to do one thing, life doesn't always work out the way you expect it to. So, have a couple of backup plans in mind so you can kind of easily pivot if things change. You have to decide, what role academics is going to play in your career, right? If you're an academic medical center, you're theoretically supposed to be doing some degree of scholarly work. Is research going to be part of your portfolio? If you don't think about this ahead of time, honestly, what's going to happen is you're not going to do any of it, because if you're doing day-to-day operations, your days are going to be full very quickly. So again, figure out what your priorities are, figure out what your plan is, figure out what your backup plans are, and make sure that you take into account the rest of your life. I had a recent grad that gave me his 5-year career plan, as he was finishing residency, and I looked at this thing and I was like, good God, you're never going to sleep, let alone have a life, if you want to do all these things in the next 5 years, right? So you need to kind of write in the fact that you need to have a life outside of work into your plans, because if not, you're going to have a relatively short career because you're going to burn to a crisp, right? So kind of, account for some of that in your life. So these I use, right? You've all seen Venn diagrams. So I divide things into, you have to figure out, what you're good at, what you like to do, and what people will pay you for, right? And ideally, there will be some overlap between those three things, right? The more overlap you have of those three things, the more options you have in life, right? If you have this, then you need to reevaluate your career, right? Because you're either going to be miserable or you're going to get fired, right? So the sooner you kind of can figure out, what things am I good at, and what things do I like to do, and can you match those two up first, then you can figure out who's going to pay you for the things that you're both good at and are interested in doing, right? So that's ideally the way to have a longer career. When we talk about hospital positions, right, so if you're doing operations administration, it gives you the tools to do a lot of different things at the hospital level. And if you have the opportunity to do things at the hospital level, you should take advantage of it, right? Because it diversifies your portfolio, it diversifies your income streams, and it gives you a better understanding of how your system works. And if you've done emergency medicine, you have a skill set that's going to be very valuable in a lot of different hospital settings. So disaster management is an easy one, right, for emergency medicine to kind of transition into, because it tends to be an EM person that tends to do disaster management for the hospital, right? Access centers and transfer centers are becoming more and more common as academic medical centers kind of become networks of hospitals, with a number of community sites. This also lends itself to EM taking over as the medical director of these, because we deal with transfers every day, so it's just an extension of what you're already doing for emergency medicine. I mean, yes, you have to deal with it inter-hospital transfers and all that, but it will be a very natural, easy fit for you to take over something like that. The same goes with network development. And telemedicine, there's a number of people that are playing in that space, but emergency medicine, especially over the last couple of years, I think has accelerated their comfort and growth in that area. You can certainly go in the emergency medicine branch and just become a chief or a chair. But then you can also think about, there's a lot of nowadays chief medical officers that were former EM people, right? Chief operating officers, and granted much smaller number, but CEO. That whole path is open to you if operations and administration is part of what you're thinking of doing for a life, and you should kind of take that into consideration. Does it fit everything else you want out of life though? So time management is important, right? Because again, if you're doing active ED operations or active QA, the amount of work you have will expand to fill every available second of your life. So if you're not proactive about designating certain blocks of time for longer term goals, you'll get swallowed up by the short term goals. There's always more work to do than time available. So you need to designate time for long-term goals. Depending on where you are in your career, you may or may not have the ability to try to regularize your schedule as much as you can. But at the very least, what I would say is you need to kind of designate one day a week as a clinical day, and then one day a week that you carve out as what I call it my no meetings day, which is not really a day that I don't have meetings, but it's a day where I choose what meetings I have and then have as much time as possible to do things that do not involve meeting with other people. Because if you haven't figured it out by now, there has never been a meeting that actually reduce work. They all create extra work, right? Every time you have a meeting, you just created an extra 10 hours of work for yourself. So having a day where you're actually not meeting with people, but actually taking care of all the work that's been generated is going to be important to keep things moving. And again, depending on where you are in your career, you may not be able to designate a full day as your no meetings day, but you should start with at least half a day, or between 8 and 12 on Tuesdays, you're not meeting with anybody. You're just doing the things that you need to do to kind of advance your long-term goals, okay? And then again, you need to account for the rest of your life into your schedule, right? If not, you will burn out relatively quickly. So then you have to make the decision. If you're in an academic medical center, are you folding research into all this other time commitments that you have? Again, that's an individual personal decision, but if you're going to roll research into everything else, you must be proactive about how you do it, because if not, you're not going to be able to generate anything, because the next problem, the next boarding issue, the next patient complaint is just going to take up that time that you may have had for research. What I would say about research, though, is that if you're at an academic medical center, right, and you're doing operations, by definition, you're doing a bunch of before and after studies, right? If you're doing operations in an intelligent fashion, you're gathering data before you have an intervention, you have an intervention, and you gather data afterwards to decide whether your intervention worked or not, right? So you just finish your study. Now what remains of that study is actually getting an IRB and getting somebody to write it, right? If you're at an academic medical center, you have a captive audience of people that can write research studies. They're called residents. They all have a scholarly requirement, right? So this is a synergistic setup where you can provide them with data and they can provide you with writing, and then it should benefit all of you at the same time, right? I sent a bunch of residents to a lot of different places to present abstracts, And let me tell you, if you send a resident to an international location to present an abstract, they will be very happy and they will do work for you, right? So again, everybody wins. And as you build this, right, then you can kind of create like a conveyor belt of studies that slowly get published and slowly get more complicated as you kind of gain more experience, and then you can maintain research productivity without, having to dedicate, a lot of time that you will not have to that. But if you're not proactive about it ahead of time, it's something that will just die on the vine. As you grow your group, ideally, if you want to kind of make sure that research is a part of your portfolio, the ideal way to do it is you get one of your operations people that has an interest and a skill set appropriate for research to actually concentrate on the research portion of the operations. To do that, that means that person probably should not have day-to-day operational responsibilities, because the moment you have day-to-day operational responsibilities, you have no free time, right? And then over time, you develop like a network of collaborators, right? So Willie, for example, is now, a collaborator in things that we do. Steve Trop, that just walked into this room, we've collaborated for like a number of years. So you get to know people over the years. Some of your residents, will go to other places, and you kind of include them in your network. And then all of a sudden, studies that 5 years before might have been a single center study for you now become a multi-center study, right? Because people at different institutions. And as we all know, just including the words multi-center into your research study significantly increases the chances of getting published, right? Not because the study is better, but because you did it at more than one site, right? All of a sudden, it magically happens that it's something better. And I think that's it. We doing questions now? Well, what I would say is like the one thing that you can't have if you want to like absorb people to like actually do operational work is you can't have lazy people, right? Because lazy is something that I can't fix. Hard work is something that your parents taught you. If they didn't teach you how to work hard, I'm never going to teach you how to work hard, right? So I can teach you, how to improve your clinical skills, how to like learn how to do some more statistics, all that. But if you're not willing to do work, I can't do anything else, right? So I think that's one very important thing for you to select. And then number two, you want people that can play well in the sandbox, right? Because a lot of operations and a lot of things that you do in operations, you actually do through, especially when you're dealing with other departments, you do through conversations with people in other departments, especially when you're not the chief, right? If you're the director of operations or like, assistant director of operations, you get a lot of stuff done by talking to your counterparts in other departments and just having things happen without your boss ever finding out, right? Because once your boss gets involved, things get significantly more complicated, right? But to be able to do that, right, you need to be able to play well in the sandbox and kind of understand that different people from different departments will have different sets of needs, and you need to be able to kind of say, okay, well, the Department of Medicine, this is what they need. It's not exactly what I want, but you have to figure out how to align, people's needs in a way that kind of achieves the best outcome for both of you, right? So yeah, I can answer that question. I cheat. I delegate that. I essentially call somebody called Josh Joseph, and I tell him I have the data question, and he's the one that really answers a lot of those questions, right? Because I know my limitations. I can consume data very well. Producing data I find much more difficult. But you know, you have to find, right? You have to find, as you create a team of people, then you know you should be recruiting people with different skill sets. One other thing that I would say is you're recruiting people, you should always be looking for somebody that's better than you at least one thing, right? You may not be able to find somebody that's better at you than at everything, but if you're hiring people that are like worse than you at everything, then you're doing it wrong, right? The goal is to kind of grow a group of people that has as broad, when you combine them, as broad a skill set as possible.
I'll give the technical side of that, and I'll make it really brief. So I will say, just in terms of like identifying the person from your department, there is this whole domain of clinical informatics, and the training for that involves a surprising amount of being able to describe how you describe data. And so even if your department doesn't necessarily have somebody who is a designated informatics person, your hospital definitely will. And in particular, for a lot of stats that you might do, again, without necessarily recourse-ing somebody who is a formal stats PhD person, one of the things that is very useful is to be able to know what the field you're looking for are, what the specific data points are, and to ask if there is somebody who can give that to you in the form of what's known as a flat file. And again, that is going to be a format that you can use without too much coaxing in Excel, in R, in any of the statistical programs. And if they can't tell you, then ask them who at Epic or who at PowerChart can give that to you. Because if you are using one of those EHRs, it's actually pretty much a requirement they can provide somebody in your department with those figures.
I think that's a really good question, and that's still an area of opportunity for most of us. Not every institution, even those that have the data someplace, will be able to have the bandwidth to get it to you. So that's one thing. Another is you may not have easy access to someone like Josh. Also, what do you want to do with the data? Are you interested in using the data as I demonstrated in my short lecture? In which case, I think it would be valuable to learn how to produce and interpret control charts. I don't think that you need to do that for every project and every piece of data, but it should be a skill that you at least have some remedial knowledge about. I'm a little bit of a nerd, well, more of a little bit of a nerd, but I did learn how to produce control charts. I use Jump Pro because I use a Mac. My academic institutions that I've been affiliated with have provided me access to it. It's an expensive piece of software. The research I've done most recently, I am not capable of executing the math involved in that, and I work with a PhD student. If you're interested in that, you can Google my name and SSRN and emergency department. You'll probably come up with 3 papers. It's another place you can publish open source as well. But the data is definitely a challenge. And getting quality data is a challenge as well.
Yeah, I agree with all of the above. I think it's what's the why? Is the why for scholarship? Is it for answering an operational question? We pour all of this information into our EHR, and yet it feels impossible to get it out unless you're at the Brigham, best as I can tell, because they have a really special program that is not replicated in many locations around single source, sophisticated analytics. And so, right, one issue is reporting, which gets into validation, right? Just because you click a button, getting on the back end, what's the source code? What I have learned is that you need unicorns who have a totally hybrid skill set, And it's not one person, it's usually a team that's a force multiplier, but you have to know what's the purpose. And in academic institutions, it becomes sophisticated very quickly, but you probably don't need that level of sophistication to run your department. And so you have to be really explicit about what operational data do I need to run my shop, and then what kind of information do I need to answer interesting questions and have sophistication for scholarship. And I agree, I built a career on partnerships because I don't have that skill set, and so I think you just have to decide what gets you excited, and what skills you want to develop, and what skills do you not want to develop, and where do you need to partner.
I don't have much to add to that. It really is like the threshold for the quality of data for practical administrative work versus research work are two entirely different things. And so making your case for what you need is the easiest way to get to what you want.
I will say that for targeted improvement projects, you probably could get by with a lot less data than you think you need. And it doesn't need to be necessarily comprehensive data. You can do sampling. It could be done by hand on paper and then input it into Excel, and for little or no cost you can get a plugin that will produce run charts and control charts in Excel. QI Charts is one brand that does it.
Although what I say back to that is, right, you want to do the work once and get 3 times the credit, right? So I normally ask for as much data as I can so I can both meet the operational need and then get the extra bonus of getting something published without having to ask for things twice. Doesn't work all the time, right? But
it also depends if you own your shop versus you're using a vendor service. So
right.
If you're having to go to a system group, that totally makes sense.
right,
If it's within your own
you
shop,
get like
then
requests for somebody to be able to just kind of suck all the data out. Yes.
So we own our own service line data team. So then we're sort of doubling down. If we're going to ask for those really large draws, and with that analytics, that's one other project we can't do. So our work tended to be more sequential. What's the operational need? Then scholarship again went into a different bucket of prioritization with our other academic requests. But they were all funneled to one central team with finite resources.
To give you an example of what you could do it yourself type stuff, if you have Epic and you can get privileges to work with Workbench reports, and you have an analyst who can dedicate just a little bit of time, then you can have some generic reports made that then you can customize. There's a lot that, and I'm not necessarily saying I'm a fan of Epic or promoting Epic. Got a lot of problems with Epic, but there are some powerful tools hidden within Workbench where you can change what you display, you can change your search criteria. Just as an example, that EKG case that I gave you, not the clinical case, but the door to EKG times. That was a Workbench report that I built out of an order code. So there's orders that are events, and I built that report, and then it was tedious. I worked with a medical student and a resident, and you can only run reports for 33 days back with Workbench. And I built reports each month back, and then I exported the data myself into Excel, and first pass I constructed control charts using Jump Pro with them. Then I taught the medical student how to do it. This is a second-year medical student. It took me only a few hours to teach him. And then I just gave him the privilege and responsibility of working on this, and then we met back and forth, and it was very fruitful for both of us. And you can manipulate all of the data in Jump Pro with, and that sounds all like kind of smoke and mirrors, but it's really not that difficult if you spend just a few hours on it.
I would comment on the reporting workbench issue. Working at an institution with 13 hospitals, where we have different workflows, the challenge is when we pull data from reporting workbench, it's only as valid as the workflow is consistent. And so we're going through a lot of work outside of emergency medicine, so again in my day job, trying to refine workflows that are processed, and then documentation workflows so that we have valid data. So it works well.
That's a
in
good
some
point.
settings, but it's
So the
challenging.
same data could mean entirely different things if the workflows are different on the.
Shift gears with one question that I think may be relevant to everybody here. Mark Tyler, you mentioned, I think, a really good method in your talk, kind of preserving the continual change going forward in getting people who are going to education in your department to also be invested in operations. At a lot of places, operations and education are almost like two completely different faculties. And there's a conflict because at many shops, the people doing a lot of the day-to-day work are called residents. And the amount of control that the operations folks may have over the workflows may have to be agreed upon by folks who are in education. So to acknowledge Leon's comment about how can we play nice in the sandbox, are there any ways that you guys have experienced that we can play nice in the sandbox and still get what we need for the department at the end of the day?
So about 7 years ago, our friend Dr. Raja had a panel like this, and the title at one of these pre-sessions was, is excellent patient care a polarity with excellent education? And it was right as we were doing our redesign. And the answer, in my humble opinion, is no, it's not actually a polarity. We believe strongly in our department that teaching residents to provide exceptional, high quality, high value patient care is excellent education. And that doesn't mean complete autonomy to order every single test. It's a conversation about what's excellent care. And we have residents meaningfully engage in helping us to define what that looks like. So one tool, and I think we talked to someone during the breakout session about this, is the pathways that we showed. And that's a really good way, a priori, for us to define, what do we think evidence-based care looks like for a thing, fill in the blank. So for instance, I've worked at 5 different academic medical centers, and the headache cocktail is different, the best as I can tell, across the country. Well, why is that? Is that a supply chain issue? Is that heuristics because that's what you were taught and so that's what you always use and that's your go-to? Is that because it's evidence-based? And so really it's an opportunity for us, not to say, well, you rotate it. So I'll give you specific examples: Denver Health, University of Colorado, and St. Joe's, and you give all different things. Or is it an opportunity to go back and say, what do we actually think excellent practice looks like? And then actually you can spread it to the other institutions where you rotate. So it's an excellent question, and we think that they can be symbiotic. Now the challenge, I would say, again, in my quality and safety role, is around avoidable errors and harm to patients, which we know will occur with learners, around like procedural skills, for instance. And that is where, we have a tolerance, for a higher rate of avoidable harm. But again, that has to be managed, right, very, very closely, and that's why obviously simulation's been built out as a specialty, for instance.
Yeah, just to double down on that is that our education leadership and our residents are involved in our operation improvements. Just very recently, we had an update to our pulmonary embolism pathway because there was a journal club that a resident brought a paper to that talked about different thresholds for D-dimers and came to the operations team with that, and we were able to integrate it into the pathway, and now it's part of our institutional process of care. And that is how residents, by coming to our case reviews and participating in meaningful ways and presenting those cases at conference, and involvement of the leadership of our education department in operations, it just becomes a part of their education to be thinking about how the department runs and how it operates and how to improve quality. So I routinely work with our residents on QI projects and pathway development based off of their interest and their desire. But I think just because that's become the culture, it self-perpetuates.
Talking about that, we also have like a pathway development thing, but some of these pathways haven't been touched for years, and some of them aren't really applicable anymore. And I feel like a lot of our pathways just aren't used because of that, because a lot of them are outdated. How do you want to make sure that these things stay updated as a whole?
So a lot of that comes down to accountability. Because this is something that we use, and these aren't the Department of Emergency Medicine saying this is how we're going to treat PEs or chest pain. It was a collaboration with cardiology and emergency department, or pulmonology, ICU and emergency department. And so when there's deviations from the pathway, these are reported. Now, sometimes there's intentional deviations from the pathway where, oh, we didn't do lysis because this person had a subarachnoid 5 days ago and we thought that that would kill them. And that's perfectly valid medical care that deviates from the pathway. And that's okay. We kind of use an informal 80-20 rule. This is going to work for 80% of the patients, but sometimes you get very good reasons to not do it. But we review those cases and we follow up. So that means the medicine team sends us cases to review where we don't align with our agreed upon goals, and we send it to them. And if we collectively decide, you know, the reason we're deviating so much is that people just don't think this is valid anymore, we update it. And we do routinely review these, and as I said, we've updated our pulmonary embolism pathway because someone identified a deficiency in the pathway, escalated to our operations team, and then was involved in developing the solution. And I think that feedback and responsiveness is fundamental. You don't respond, you don't have accountability, people will stop flagging things for you to look at.
Yeah, now that I'm executive sponsor of a pathway process for a system, now, right, 12 hospital system, but that actually within one state has very different regional practices and different resources. So some are appropriate, some are not appropriate, variations in care. But you have to have a governance process that does essentially a look back or a request for is there a need to sunset, revise, or keep? So establishing that governance model. So a governing body with a process with an accountable owner is sort of the short answer. So within emergency medicine, within the service line, there is a list of pathways that come up based on their process of updating, and I think we have it at 2 years.
2 years.
That said, anyone can bring forward a pathway for reconsideration to the pathway committee, and then that group by consensus, best practice and consensus, comes up with what a care looks like. Another issue might be supply chain. For instance, we had to change our alcohol withdrawal pathway because of, all of the various shortages that happened over the last 2 years, for instance.
And that's assuming that your pathways are within a framework that includes governance. There are plenty of places that have a pathway that was developed and it sits outside any governance at all. And that, I don't know if that's the case for you. Even at places that have relatively sound, overall well adhered to structure for their policies, procedures, and guidelines, there are holdout areas, clinical areas that might have their own little thing on their own little website, and then they pull it out of some, dusty piece of paper or off somebody's hard drive and say, you didn't adhere to our policy or something. That's a problem. I think that that there should be a uniform process and governance for all pathways. So policies and guidelines, and depending on your pathway, what it's going to fall into, and it should include factors like 2-year cycles. At the end of 2 years, what are we doing with this? Are we sunsetting it? Are we revising it? Or is it good to go? We'll put a rubber stamp on it after careful review with all stakeholders. And at the bottom of it, it should list the initiating department and the contributing departments. And all stakeholders need to sign off on it. And you could turn that into a really valuable experience to continue to improve care, to provide educational experience, and be innovative. And I'll give an example of that. So this was a new guideline that came out, and it was actually made and then incorporated into an existing guideline. It was, Boston has a modest homeless population, and one institution I worked at had a number of cases of frostbite, and we never really documented them. But one single case prompted a guideline for thrombolytic therapy for frostbite, and what came out of that was 2 scholarly projects, collaboration in the scholarly project between radiology, interventional radiology, and emergency medicine, and then a collaborative pathway that involved radiology, emergency medicine, trauma surgery, orthopedic hand surgery, internal medicine, pharmacy, had to go through the P&T committee, and then was incorporated into the thrombolytic guidelines that exist on the pharmacy policy page, which is part of the hospital main policy page. And so residents got scholarly experience from it. Then an offshoot of it was a QI project that went through the QI hub, and that was another residents' scholarly project for their residency. And then we also were able to, through the QI hub, which had funding for CME, put that as CME for faculty. So you can turn a lot of this stuff into very productive activities.